welcome to our show host series. I'm Christine Baird, founder of Worthful Media, and we're talking today about probably one of the most timely issues that I discuss with podcast clients right now in 2024, and that is, where can you focus your strengths as a show host to make impact in your audience that lines up with your long-term goals? You may be like, Christine, you talk about this all the time, but I'm going to get pretty specific on today's video because there's a specific process I take clients and potential clients through to make decisions about, is this an audio first show? Is it a video first show? Is it a mini series? Is it an always on show? Just some really big key decisions that we make right out of the gate to make sure that the show we're making is lining up with their long-term goals. And if you've never had the chance to talk to a media strategist, a podcast producer, someone with that background, you may feel like this is a really hard, big decision and I'm a little lost. And that's usually what people say when they come to me and are looking for advisory and consulting advice, whether they're, hiring us as a production company to make their show, or they're just hiring me as a consultant to help them think through what makes sense. So I'm going to kind of give you the highlight reel version of how I help clients figure out what kind of show to make, what kind of format to focus on, how to release episodes, and then how to connect all of that back to the return on investment and the impact goals they have for the show. Now, I'm going to paint some really big pictures that I hope you can relate to kind of cut to the chase. If you already have a really big audience of people who've been listening to your stories, following your work, reading your books, like you have a body of work and an existing audience, and they're in it to win it with you, there is a huge opportunity for you to do an audio first show that will make a big impact and be shared quickly. And that's unique to you. If you've already built the audience and you already have a big body of work you're known for that people love and want more of, you can do things with an audio first show that a lot of people can't. And so I really don't want you to skip over that. A great example is Brené Brown. I use her a lot, but she's done some really interesting things with her podcast in the last 2 years. She's just come off a year-long hiatus. She switched production companies. She has done some really interesting things in podcasting. And she does an audio first show, and it's with like a network. But the important thing to understand about her is that she is in this really unique position to do things and kind of capitalize on this huge audience she's built over, decades of doing really great in-depth work with books and TED Talks and shows and courses. She can do things with an audio first show that a lot of people couldn't do. And so it makes a lot of sense for her to be doing that because she can access guests who most people can't get to, but they can't always be in person or on video. And that's not a problem because she's built that relationship with her audience already and has this body of work for them to reference. So they don't need to be watching every episode on YouTube to vet her for viability or expertise. We don't need to know what Brené Brown looks like, right? She is well recognized. You can picture her face when you're hearing her voice. She has done decades of work to build that body of brand and research and books that support an audio first show. And it's really smart that she does an audio first show because it frees her up to make episodes with guests and on topics that would be a lot more challenging or a lot more labor intensive or a lot more expensive to do if she was trying to do video first. So she's a great example, and you don't have to be Brené Brown to apply that. You can be working with a way smaller audience and maybe lesser known body of work, but you know whether you are standing out in your industry already, in your niche, within your target market or audience. Do you know that you've already spent a couple decades building up this rapport and this reputation? If so, you could do amazing things with an audio first show. And some of the key indicators are, like we talked about, what does your current audience look like? 2, what kind of access do you have to guests? Because if you know you can get amazing people on your show, but maybe not in person, not on video, don't let that deter you from doing a show. You don't have to do video first just because so many people are doing video first. And that's just the start. But I wanted to offer that to you from the top. Since we've been talking so much about video shows on our YouTube channel and in our emails, I don't want you to think that audio first shows are out. They're not, but they're well suited to existing audiences who are well familiar with an existing body of work, and they are just ready. They're primed. They don't need to be introduced or convinced or validated to come over and listen. Okay, now let's talk about maybe you're on the other end of the spectrum and you're like, actually, Christine, I don't have a big audience. I'm not known for a big body of work. I have really great things to say. I have a really thoughtful show. I know I'm ready to do it, but like my audience isn't developed yet. Maybe I'm known for a different body of work, but I want to actually move over into this other area, so that won't necessarily apply. This is where a video first show can make a ton of impact. One, because video first shows are traditionally hosted on YouTube, which is a search engine, which means discoverability is boosted in a really big way from a podcast, which is not very easy to find on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And it really helps build your recognizability. We've talked about this in other videos. Your face, on a video every week is super helpful in building that relationship with your audience to help them understand, like, okay, this is who this person is. This is their body language. This is their vibe. This is their energy. I'm seeing them week after week and building a relationship with like the bigger version of them, right? And that can just go miles to accelerate your audience development and your discoverability, both of those. So a video first show can make a lot of sense if you're trying to kind of build out your recognizability and your thought leadership or just your status within your niche. If you already have the creds, but not a lot of people know you do, YouTube first shows can be very helpful in that department. Now let's talk about some of the other pieces. What about like a mini series versus an always on show? What about doing like a co-hosted show versus a single hosted show? This is where I usually get into the weeds with people. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about like, what are the resources you already have available? Time-wise, literally, can you do a weekly show? That's the first question. And some people know off the top of their head, they're like, no way, I'm actually way too busy. I can only batch record these episodes a couple times a year. And that answers that question. So first off, we just talk about actual availability, being realistic about whether or not you can sustain a weekly show or whether your lifestyle and your time requires a mini series, limited runs, shorter seasons. If you can choose and you're not totally constrained by time, the next question I would ask is, does the topic that you want to dive into or the conversations you want to have on your show, do they better fit a kind of topic, newsy, relevant cadence, kind of like a news cycle that refreshes every week and there's kind of always something new and interesting to talk about? Or is what you're talking about really timeless and you could, record a batch of episodes and put them up and they'd be as relevant 3 years from now as today? That kind of helps you realize like, oh, actually, I probably could do a seasonal mini series that just drops once or twice a year. And then I can spend the whole rest of the year sharing and promoting and discussing those pieces. And that's a cool place because then you can kind of put more production value into the mini series because you don't have to make it every week. You can make a really good version and then maybe you just drop 1 or 2 seasons a year and you know that content is so relevant for the long haul that you can just keep referring back to it and keep sharing it. That's a really great question to ask yourself if you're trying to figure out like format-wise what makes sense. And then the last bit of advice I want to give in this video, just to help you kind of make some progress about making these big decisions that can feel overwhelming if you haven't had access to a strategist or a producer. I really want you to be honest with yourself about what brings you energy and joy and excitement. And you may be like, whatever, but it's super important. As the show host, if you're not energized and nourished and excited and kind of creatively stimulated by the show that you decide to make, it's very unlikely that you will continue with it for very long or that will be your best work. And that's because as a show host, you are the lifeblood of the show. You are the reason people are listening or watching. You're the curator. You're the source of the whole thing. And if you're kind of running on, a half tank or your attention's really divided, you're strapped for time, that you've overcommitted to a style of show that you can't really sustain, it's just not going to really be your vibe. And people will feel that and they'll kind of disengage. And I want to bring that up as the final point in this video because even though we just talked about all these different strategic pieces for you to think through and kind of make like, an emotionless decisions, it's really important to bring your emotions in and make sure that the show you're making is exciting to you, is energizing, does fill you up, is worth it to you to keep coming back and making more of.